Today, this video is about speaking out and the psychology of people who speak out against abuses by the system and atrocities. We have witnessed in Minnesota Operation Metro Surge and the havoc that was caused by federal ICE agents in this state. And we also witnessed a very encouraging amount of Minnesotans coming out to protest, to protect their neighbors, to say, we're not going to stand by while we watch the people in our community be abused. There have been people willing to step out in freezing weather, freezing temperatures, and demonstrate and protest in the streets, along the sidewalks, in the city, and in freezing temperatures, risking arrest, speaking out, people who are driving patrol for their neighbors, people who are using whistles to alert people when ICE agents are in proximity, hospital workers willing to stand up and hold press conferences, doctors willing to speak up on behalf of their patients. And we've seen this in history as well. And there were protesters who, throughout history, have stood up and denounced atrocity and have lost their lives for it. So tonight, the light will be on what is the psychology of people who are willing to speak up and speak out. Why do some people speak out strongly when injustices happen? When injustices happen to other people, especially, like even if they would be safe, and why do most people not? Well, that is a fascinating question, and it's actually very well studied in social psychology, behavioral neuroscience, and primatology. The short answer is speaking out requires overcoming multiple layers. We're talking multiple layers of biological, social, and cognitive barriers. And not everyone experiences the same barriers or motivations. And so we're going to look at this bit by bit. So, first, we're going to look at the biology of social risk. Second, we're going to look at social norms and conformity. Thirdly, we're going to look at cognitive and moral factors. Fourthly, we'll look at personality and temperament of those individuals. We'll also look at, fifthly, the situational and structural factors. And sixth, we'll look at neural correlates and moral courage. And then we'll look at number 7, the minority influence effect. Number 1, the biology of social risk. So we're primates. We are human beings are primates. Our closest relative is the chimpanzee and next to the bonobo. We are wired to maintain social cohesion in our primate hierarchies. And being too vocal against group norms will get you bullied out sometimes. And being vocal, even if something is ethical and you speak out, that can get you mobbed out of a group. If you've been a victim of workplace mobbing or community-based mobbing, you know it. So being too vocal against group norms or authority can trigger things like amygdala activation, which regulates your fear and threat perception, stress hormone and cortisol release. So that's your fight, flight, or freeze response, and the vagal inhibition component. And that is decreased social engagement under perceived threat. So when there is a perceived threat, people tend to disengage, and they become quiet, or they don't act. And the result is that most people's brain's natural bias predisposes them toward caution and silence when confronting injustices, especially if it risks their social standing. Studies in macaques, or the macaque monkeys and the chimpanzees, they show similar patterns. Low-ranking individuals in these primate groups often avoid challenging high-ranking individuals, even if they witness unfair behavior, because the personal cost is very high. Next is to the social norms and conformity. So classic studies show that humans heavily weigh what others are doing. So the Ash conformity experiment found that people often go along with obviously wrong answers to avoid standing out. And the bystander effect. So in the bystander effect, you've got the behavior that in emergencies, the more people present, the less likely, yes, the less likely someone is to intervene. And speaking out requires breaking conformity norms, which is socially and psychologically risky. Number three, we've got cognitive and moral factors. So people who speak out, they have, there are three things I want to talk about here on the cognitive and moral factors. The people that speak out tend to have a strong moral identity. They define themselves as someone who acts on principle. That principle or those principled ethics mean a lot to them. And cognitive empathy. So those people tend to have a high degree of cognitive empathy, and that is the ability to see the consequences of injustice very clearly. So when injustices happen, they can project forward a bit and see like what the fallout of those injustices are going to have overall. They're also very future oriented in their reasoning, the willingness to accept short term social risk for long term moral goals. So, because of their future oriented reasoning, they have this willingness to accept short term social risk as a result of their speaking out. And then most people lack the combination of moral clarity, risk tolerance, and situational awareness, which is why the majority remain silent. So, number four is personal temperament. There is a personal temperament component to the people that end up speaking out against atrocity. Research shows that speaking out is linked to certain traits. And I'll go through these four traits and their effect on speaking out. So you've got openness to experience. People in the five-factor ocean model tend to be high in openness to experience. People who are willing to speak out against injustice, against atrocity, they have a high openness to experience. And this increases their willingness to challenge norms. They will question norms. They will not just go along to go along. And then there is conscientiousness. So people in the conscientiousness component of the Ocean five-factor model, people who are high in conscientiousness may speak out even if rules discourage it because of the conscientious adherence to their principles and their ethics. And then agreeableness. So if you are high in agreeableness, you are less likely to speak out. So the people that are speaking out tend to be the people that are less agreeable. Now, it doesn't mean that those people aren't people pleasing, because a lot of disagreeable people can mask as people pleasers because they pick their battles and they other people's feelings are important, but they may not agree. So they'll pick their battles. But if they're lower in agreeableness, that will increase their tolerance for confrontation, especially if there is a moral opposition to what's going on. And then boldness. People who speak out more during times of atrocity are more bold and they have a lower sense of fear sensitivity. So this is, and that's actually an incredibly high predictor of moral courage. So people that have a low fear sensitivity and they have a boldness attached to that. Um, or those two are hand in hand. That is one of the strongest predictors of moral courage. And then in primate studies, individuals with high social confidence or dominance flexibility are more likely to intervene on behalf of others. So, so people with a high sense of social confidence and dominance flexibility. So that means that you don't have to be dominant or socially dominant all the time, but that your social dominance will trigger or toggle on when those atrocities or abuses happen. And then number 5 is situational and structural factors. So even high moral individuals sometimes stay silent. Sometimes they do. So people who have a high moral compass, not everybody of that group will speak out. Um, and that is typically impacted by 3 things. And those 3 things are power asymmetry, peer influence, and diffuse responsibility. So the power asymmetry says that speaking against authority is riskier when hierarchical penalties are severe. And peer influence, if nobody else speaks out, fear of social isolation dominates. So peer influence, if people are afraid of being ostracized, afraid of being bullied, afraid of being shunned by the group, then they will not speak. And then diffuse responsibility. So that means that when injustice feels abstract or spread across many perpetrators, engagement drops. So that is quite frightening. That means all a system would have to do, or all architects of a very atrocious system would have to do, would be to create a sense of diffused responsibility. And then and that actually that does happen and is happening right now as we speak. I'll make more videos about that, but that's when injustice feels more abstract and it hides more, and it's not as vocal and it's not as front and center. People are less aware. It falls under the radar of the noise of their daily living. And this abstracted form of injustice uh, is spread across multiple perpetrators or systems that perpetrate these things. And so there's an inability to identify the centers responsible for the atrocity. And then engagement of speaking out and fighting against that atrocity drops, which is very sad for the people who are victimized by that atrocity. And so conversely, speaking out is more likely when, so people will start to speak out more when there is visible support and there are other prominent or vocal allies, and other allies present. So the likelihood that other people will begin speaking out is higher when there are others that will speak out with them and they're not doing that alone. Speaking out is more likely when the cost of speaking out is low. So when there is social or legal safety, and also the injustice affects someone close or relatable. So when you are closer to the person who is impacted by the injustice, people, it becomes more palpable to people, and people will feel closer to that injustice as if it's happening to them, and their empathy will be triggered for the people who have that empathy. And only a small number of people will be able to, a much smaller number of people will be able to relate to people suffering from injustice if they are very distant, or if they're not proximate, or if they're not relatable, which is, it's also very sad. Um, and then and then six, the neural correlates of a moral courage. So let's talk about the neurology of it all. So neuroimaging studies show that those who intervene show increased activation in anterior cingulate cortex. And that area of the brain relates to conflict monitoring. So their conflict monitoring centers are more highly activated. And the brain scans also show that there is an increased activity of dorsolateral prefrontal cortex area of the brain. So that is where cognitive control gains power over fear. So those individuals have a better ability to regulate fear. And the third point under the neurology of moral courage is that the brain scans showed regulated amygdala response. And that area of the brain showed in the amygdala response the ability to reduce the fear response when acting. And that all of that brain imaging suggests that speaking out is an executive function, not an emotional reaction. So, for all of those who criticize protesters or people who speak out as being emotional or unhinged, it's actually the opposite of what's going on. In order to speak out, there is a executive function, a higher executive function that is needed to speak out against atrocity. Now we get into number 7, which is the minority influence effect. So people who consistently speak out, even when most remain silent, often become catalysts for social change. That's very positive. That's very, very inspiring. There are 3 things about this. Their persistence can shift norms over time, so don't give up. Observers start recalibrating social risk. So the people that are observing, the people that are willing to speak up, are recalibrating their own social risk and may decide, hey, maybe it's not so risky to take a stand on this atrocity that's going on. And then number 3 is change often begins with one courageous individual. So it just takes one person sometimes to be able to have that stronger executive function, the higher moral courage, and the fearlessness of the short-term cost of speaking out against atrocity. And some historical examples are whistleblowers, people who raise ethical concerns, people who report things that are clearly wrong, um, civil rights activists, investigative journalists. These people are often vilified or demonized, and the narrative is twisted against them. But people who have their eyes open, who understand what atrocity is and can reason, are eventually able to see how valuable and what these people are and what advocates they are for people that are more vulnerable and have borne a large brunt of abuse, but in systemic abuse. And now I'm just going to summarize what we talked about. It was a lot. Okay, in summary, the reason why most people don't speak out against atrocity are that their biological threat systems bias them toward self-preservation. So speaking out is actually, the people with moral courage might say, I spoke out because part of it was self-preservation. And the reason why they say that is because they saw themselves in the individuals that they were speaking out for. But overall, most people don't speak out because they stay silent due to self-preservation. And then and then another reason why most people don't speak out, because social norms and conformity pressures make silence safer. And it does, because if you stay silent, you won't be mobbed out of the group. You won't be shunned. You won't have a narrative twisted against you. You won't be scapegoated in a hierarchy. Um, and most people don't speak out because cognitive and moral clarity is required but unevenly distributed. Not every individual has cognitive and moral clarity. And most people don't speak out because personality traits can influence willingness to confront risk. Structural and situational factors can amplify or mitigate risk. So they may not speak out because of structural factors that amplify risk. And then those who do speak out, they combine four things: moral conviction, risk tolerance, social insight, sometimes innate temperament or social confidence. In other words, courage is a skill, a trait, and a calculation of social risk. So, next time, if you're wondering, why did I speak out? Or next time, you might be wondering, why didn't I speak out? Those are some of the reasons. So those are some of the factors that can keep people from speaking out against atrocity and injustice. And those are also some of the reasons why people do speak out against atrocity and injustice.